This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Juan?
Well, millions of Afghans are voting in presidential and provincial elections today amid tight security, amid threats of violence from the Taliban, and with thousands of foreign troops still occupying the country led by the United States. Some 300,000 Afghan and international troops have been deployed to protect voters, but there were a number of reported attacks, including mortars being fired at polling stations in the southern city of Kandahar and elsewhere. About 17 million people are eligible to vote, with 6,500 polling stations open in 364 districts across the country. The Interior Ministry has said about a third of the country is at a high risk of attack. There are also widespread concerns about corruption, with reports of voting cards being openly sold and of candidates offering large bribes.
Opinion polls are indicating a lead for President Hamid Karzai with 45% of the ballot in. Without an outright majority of 50%, Karzai would be forced into a runoff with his closest challenger, which is expected to be his former Foreign Minister Abdullah Abdullah. Meanwhile, the Afghan government has called for an international media blackout on reporting violence on this day of the election, and some journalists have reported being harassed and beaten by security forces. We go now to Afghanistan, where we're joined by independent journalist Rick Rowley of Big Noise Films. He's on the line with us from Mazar in northern Afghanistan. Rick, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thanks, Amy.
Describe what you see there today, what you found. You're in the area of Dostum, right, the notorious warlord who was just brought back by the president, Hamid Karzai, to get out the vote.
That's absolutely right. Here, the polls have just closed in Afghanistan around 10 minutes ago. And we're gathering reports from around the country, and anecdotally it seems that turnout has been down nationwide and down especially severely in the Pashtun South, where there's been a lot of violence. It's been calm here in Mazar. Mazar Sharif itself, turnout seems to be low at the polling stations we're at, but we also traveled to Shebregan, which is the sort of fortress stronghold of warlord Rashid Dostum, where turnout was actually exceptionally heavy. Rashid Dostum, as you said, returned 2 days ago to Afghanistan with under the offer of immunity from war crimes prosecution from Hamid Karzai, and he promised to deliver 2 million votes to President Karzai. So really, and you know, there have been attacks around the country. In Kandahar, the New York Times is actually reporting that there were hangings, that the Taliban hanged 2 people who turned out to vote. But a lot of the low turnout seems to be also from voter apathy because of a general dissatisfaction with the political system here. I mean, elections are supposed to be demonstrations of the viability of a good functioning state and a good functioning democracy. But here, these elections are being seen by many Afghanis as the end of the hope of a strong central government. In 2004, when Hamid Karzai was elected, there was a lot of hope that he would end, decades of warlord rule, and he made initial moves to try to sideline some of the most notorious warlords like Fahim and Ismail Khan. But in this election, Fahim is running as his vice president, and he has allied himself with Dostum, with Mohaqiq, and with a whole slew of other warlords who are promising to deliver votes and who run their areas of the country like small kings. So instead of this election being a symbol of a smoothly functioning democracy and a strong, viable central state, the Afghanis are seeing this election as the end of that, and of the beginning, instead of the central state capturing, controlling the warlords are capturing, controlling the electoral process at the heart of the democracy here.
And Rick, how visible is the military presence, both of the Afghan army and of foreign troops around these polling places?
Well, in the polling places I'm at here, there is a pretty heavy presence of Afghani police. There is virtually no foreign soldiers here on the ground. I mean, we're in one of the most stable parts of the north that is, pretty heavily, securely under the control of warlords like Dostum, and there has been very little violence here. So there's a heavy police presence, but no military outside of that.
Rick Rowley is speaking to us from northern Afghanistan, from Mazar. We're also joined by Sonali Kolhatkar, host of Uprising on Pacifica radio station KPFK, co-author of the book Bleeding Afghanistan, Washington Warlords and the Propaganda of Silence. And she co-directs the Afghan Women's Mission. Sonali, your take on today's elections, their significance, and President Hamid Karzai, the incumbent.
Well, you know, on the surface, it seems as though, and most mainstream media are reporting, that the legitimacy of the occupation by the U.S. and NATO are linked to the legitimacy of these elections. And by that standard, that's already failed. Just given the very widespread voting, the fact that Hamid Karzai has essentially bought and paid most of his supporters, has persuaded other candidates not to run, his family has used bribes, and the U.S. already knows that. And the fact that he's going to end up the winner through this illegitimate method already suggests that the election and, by extension, the occupation is illegitimate. But then if you step back and if you judge the U.S. and NATO occupation by its actions, which I think we really need to remind ourselves that these elections are happening in the context of this occupation that's now gone on for nearly 8 years, what it ends up looking like in context of these elections is one set of warlords, that's us, protecting a second set of warlords, that's Karzai and his cohorts, from a third set of warlords, which are the Taliban. Who's protecting the Afghan people? Nobody, and that's why they're not showing up to vote. And I think we really need to step back and realize that, broadly speaking, this is the context of these elections. This is what it means for the ordinary Afghan person, and really it means that this entire occupation, along with the election, is illegitimate.
Sonali, I'd like to hone in on that point. It's been now about 30 years of warfare in Afghanistan, with a few breaks, but the impact on the Afghan people of holding elections while this continued violence combs throughout the country.
Well, you know, Afghans are desperate for democracy. You know, you hear a lot in the media about, well, are Afghans really ready? Are they really ready to put aside their ethnic divisions, etc.? In 2004, when they first voted, as well as in 2005 when they voted for the parliamentary elections, there was a large turnout. In fact, the largest was in 2004. And very soon when Karzai started dealing with the warlords, people started becoming apathetic. There was a smaller turnout in 2005 for the parliamentary elections. And now, 4 years later, there's an even smaller turnout. And I think Afghans are realizing that going to the polls, you know, means nothing. They will go if they feel that they will actually get some kind of real change. But also remember, the Taliban has become much stronger in the past several years, which is a direct result of the U.S.-NATO occupation. They've threatened to cut off the fingers of anybody who has an ink mark showing that they've voted. And so in the southern areas of Afghanistan, where the occupation is the strongest, it's the hardest for anybody to vote. And that is a direct link I think we should understand and not miss.
Talk about women voting in Afghanistan, Sonali, and then I want to talk about just the status of the humanitarian crisis there. How do women vote?
Absolutely.